Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. I've got a cool cooler here from Cooler Master. So today we've got the MasterAir MA612 Stealth ARGB with dual sickle flow 120 ARGB fan. I'm guessing there are two fans there, so it should be fans, maybe. So before we get it out of the box, let's take a look at the box itself and see what is going on here. Okay, so first, you can see all the things that it is certified, compatible with. So we've got ASUS, ASRock, ASRock, Gigabyte, MSI. So all of their little methods they use to control the RGB from the motherboard, it looks like this is all compatible with it. And then let's see what else it looks like. There's a little ARGB controller that comes with this cooler. And what the little controller is for is, let's say your motherboard doesn't support any RGB functions. Well, this still enables you to control the colors of your fan or fans. So let's look at the side here and see what's going on first. So sockets, we've got the coverage there, pretty much everything current and going back several years for Intel and AMD. 6 heat pipes. Okay, the fans, it looks like we've got a speed up to 1800 RPMs. They are PWM. And let's see what else. That's about it as far as excitement on there. Okay, so now we've got some dimensions. So what's important here is your overall 158 millimeters for people with computer cases that are shallow. And then it says here it's compatible with all RAM sizes. So it looks like you can see the heat pipes are shifted to the right slightly, which allows for some clearance of your tall heat spreaders on your RAM modules there. And looking at the back of the box, it looks like we've got black brushed aluminum top cover, so that's nice. Dual sickle flow ARGB fans, so you can do the push-pull configuration there. And 6 heat pipes, easy installation, low vibration for quiet fan performance there. And then we've got different languages, and that's about it there. Okay, so now we can get it out of the box. And I always like Cooler Master boxes. I like the purple and black themed colors. Plus, you know, if you look at the front, there it is. There's the cooler. That's all you need to know. We don't have dragons exploding and all that stuff. We don't need it. It's just the cooler. So, I can get the little tab off there. Alright, so there is probably a hardware box with all the mounting. Instructions, and usually like a warranty information. All right, and there it is out of the box. It's sort of clamshelled between these two protective plastic pieces, and there you go. There is the cooler. Very nice. There's that brushed aluminum top cover that we were talking about on the side. And you can see the heat pipes there are offset, which is part of the approach to allowing for RAM clearance. And there's a nice protective cover over the machined surface there. So you can see how that's machined to be as flat as possible. And everything has a nice, stealthy, matte black finish. I like that. And then, of course, there's one of the 4-pin Pwm fan connectors. This is probably for your RGB functionality. I would imagine each fan probably, has that. And it has retained fasteners there. I like that. So you don't have to chase the screws around. So let's see what's in the box. So this should have all of the mounting hardware. And yep, SATA connector for power. And then all of the mounting brackets. And what's nice is you can go through the manual here and it shows you all of the items that should be in the bags here. And you can get an idea of how many of each one you should have, so you can do a quick inventory and make sure that everything is there. So again, there's the SATA power for your RGB functionality. And then this is to interface with your different motherboards. And there's your ability to control 2 fans with one header on your motherboard. It's a little splitter. And then there's the little RGB controller. And of course all the fasteners and hardware for either an AMD or an Intel installation. And then there's some thermal paste and some of the plastic clips that are used during the installation. Now of course when you set your cooler down, I pop that cover off, but you always want to pop that cover back on before you set your cooler down because you don't want to scratch up that nice machine surface. Alright, so the installation is pretty straightforward. You've got the standard bracket here. It says Intel on one side and AMD on the other. And I cleaned the top of my CPU off from the thermal paste that was on there from the cooler that I just took off. So the way this goes together, you got these little plastic clips and then these little studs. They've got a square bottom and they sort of go in this little slot that keeps them from turning on you. So each one of these has a little plastic bracket that connects and pops over. So for an Intel installation, let's see, so this fits over like that. And then we've got several positions based on which socket. So you can see the little detents there. And depending upon which socket you've got, you push it in to the next level. So for this one, I think it's sort of in the middle. So we'll do all 4 in that position. And if you're wrong, it's pretty easy to just move them to the location that you need. And let's see, we got 2 more. This little test bench here I made out of some old brackets I had laying around. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it gets the job done. And you know, air coolers are still pretty relevant these days, even though they don't necessarily have the cool factor that you get with liquid cooling and all the fancy radiators. They still get the job done. Alright, so each one of these has to pop into that little pocket. And then take the motherboard and the studs pop up from underneath. So the next thing is you take these little spacers here and I'll show you again. The bracket here fits on the back like that, and it can be flipped over either way. It really doesn't matter. You just need to make sure you get the little studs lined up with the hole there. And then I'll hold that position. And since this is a socket 1151, this is the stud that goes on there. And again, this is a socket 1151, so these are the little spacers that you use right there. So you get them snug down, but you'll notice they still wobble around a little bit, and that's normal. You think they're not in there right, but that's actually okay, because when you get the rest of the bracketry on there and tighten down the final fasteners, all of this play goes away. So now I'm ready to put these brackets on, and these are for an Intel installation. These brackets over here, the one that's shaped like that, that's for AMD, but we're going with Intel. So you need to figure out which way do these go on there. Do they go on there like that, or do they go on there like this? So you need to determine which way your cooler will mount. Now this is the intake side, so the air is going to be pulled in from this side and it comes out this side over here. So that's the exhaust. So usually you put your intake over here by your ram. Now you don't have to do it that way, but that's just the way it usually goes on there. And the fasteners are right here at this position. So that means the brackets that I'm going to use are going to go on there like this. So one will fit like that. And the second one will fit on there like that. Now it's got kind of a bend to it. You want the bend, the little flange there to point down toward your motherboard. And now I'm ready for these little caps. They've got a little X on the top, but they're threaded through. And that little fastener there is what you put on there to lock down your bracket. And of course there's one on either side. So you get those snugged up. And then we get the cooler on there. And then these two threaded holes here, those are the threaded holes that hold your cooler. And when you get all this stuff tightened down, all this slack gets drawn up and your cooler is basically held in contact with the top of your CPU. And here's a quick close-up of the bracket before I get the cooler on there. And again, this is a socket 1151. So a good way to help remove heat is to increase the surface area. So we have 55 fins in the vertical fin stack, but Cooler Master actually goes a little further and uses an extruded aluminum fin or series of fins that are incorporated into the top of the base. So that also helps remove a little extra heat. And the heat pipe diameter is, looks like it's right about 6 millimeters. And again, the fasteners on both sides are retained with these little clips right there that keep the fasteners always attached to the base. And then the springs, you can see there's a spring there on each side, if I can get it to focus. Those maintain a nice, smooth, even, consistent pressure or downforce between the cooler and your CPU. Something to point out here on this little controller, somewhere in the back there are at least, well, there's at least one magnet. There might be more than one, but that allows you to stick it somewhere in or on your case. And now it's time to put the thermal paste on. Now there are of course 100 different ways to put thermal paste on, and everybody has their own special scientifically proven technique. And in all the years I've been doing this, I don't know that I've ever really had a problem with thermal paste. Every once in a while I'll get a cooler that acts a little funny, the temperatures are a little high. It's just because it's not seated on there just right. I take the cooler off, put the cooler back on, and everything is fine. So now, okay, you want to take this off before you put the cooler on, of course, but before I even do that, what I need to do, and I'll pop that back on to protect the bottom, is I need to pop these fans off. And the fans, I'll show you here, we've got a pretty nice way to hold them on there. The cooler itself, you need to have the fans off so that you can access the fasteners there. But the fans, if we look at these, you can see they actually have these plastic brackets that are screwed to the fans, and they're actually these little rubber covers. So there should be like a little screw underneath there. Yeah, there's a little screw under there. So these are isolation, sound, noise, vibrating dampers there, so that your fan doesn't vibrate up against your cooler. But anyway, these just pop right on and pop right off. And what's nice about it is your fans also are able to slide up and down a little bit on the cooler. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. But for now, we got to get the cooler installed. So, again, I have to look at this and make sure that my intake side is right and the exhaust side is right. So I think the way you can see the heat pipes are kind of angling that direction. That sort of biases the fin stack away from your ram, and I think that's where I want it. So now we'll go ahead and tighten this down. And what I do is I go from side to side. I don't tighten one side all the way down. You just get them started and you alternate back and forth so that you apply even pressure. What you don't want to do is tighten one of these all the way down, or your cooler will start to sort of sit like that, and you'll be stressing your mounting bracket unnecessarily. So just go back and forth, and again, be careful with your screwdriver that you don't slip and hit your motherboard. That's why I always use two hands when I put these on. One is sort of a guide, and the other one to do the turning. Okay, so the left side here is snug, and the right should bottom out here. Yeah, right about there. Okay, so now we're ready for the fans. All right, so I'll get the fans on there. Now I know earlier I said that this slides up and down on here. It doesn't really slide. I thought it did, but once you lock the little brackets to the cooler, it doesn't really slide, but you can adjust it up and down a little bit. There is a little bit of play there. So you want to make sure you keep your RGB cable here and your fan cable kind of out of the way. And then the bracket snaps into these grooves, or two sets of grooves. So yeah, you can adjust it up or down a little bit. So if I want to go down just a little, I can move it down and then sort of snap it into position there. And the same on this side. And again, this is the exhaust side, so I want it to go on the back, so it's pushing air out of the back. And it's the same way on this one. I can adjust it up or down a little, but you sort of move it to where the position is that you want it to be locked in, and then you sort of push that into the groove. And there you go. All right, so I have the splitter installed here to the motherboard fan header. I got the two sockets there, and that's where I'll plug the fans in. So I'll bring the splitter around here. And it doesn't really matter which fan gets plugged into which splitter connection. And then I'll get the RGB connectors hooked up. All right, so there are two ways to connect your RGB and control it. The first way, you can use this little controller here that Cooler Master supplies you. So basically your fans end up plugging into this. There's an intermediate piece here I'll show you in a moment. And then all of the controls through this. And you'd use that if you had a motherboard that did not support RGB. At least you could still control the RGB on your fans. The other way is the fans connect to this intermediate piece, and then this just connects directly to the header on your motherboard. So now the RGB control is sort of handed off to the motherboard. Okay, so for now I'm going to use the controller, so I'll hook it up that way. And if you use the motherboard software, you just have to get into that and set it up that way. And I'll try that here a little later using the MSI software. But for now, we will just assume that the motherboard does not have any control, and we'll use the controller. So this intermediate connector here, it has this one here, it has a little label on there for gigabytes. So this is for a gigabyte motherboard. And this other one is for everything else. Basically your ASRock, ASRock, ASUS, and MSI all use this connector. So for now we'll connect the RGB from the fans. Let's see, the connectors on there are a little shorter. So I have the intake fan connected, and this is just the little connector for the exhaust fan. So we'll get it connected. It's not a very long lead, so you have to stretch a little. All right, so now the two fans, or the RGB for the two fans, are connected to this, and then this plugs into an intermediate piece. And this is basically your SATA power. It needs power. And then we have a couple different connectors here. So since this one here is female, we use the male end. And you'll notice, of course, this is a 3-pin, so there's only one way it can go together, but there are 2 little arrows, and those 2 little arrows are what end up facing each other. And then the other end here goes to the controller, like that. And then I just have to connect this to a SATA power source coming off my main power supply. And it's nice they give you this little connector here, this little clip or plastic protector. And what it's for is when you connect your RGB cables together. So this comes from the cooler and this goes down to your little manual controller there. This connects over it like that, pops over it, and it protects it and keeps the 2 cables connected. Alright, so all the RGB stuff is connected here to the little RGB controller. Get the graphics card installed, and then we'll be ready to power it up. Alright, so I got the graphics card on there. Everything is ready to power up. So let's see what happens. There we go. Of course, I'll have to do some fan tuning. Alright, I got the system powered up and we're doing some fan tuning, so it will run the fans at full speed, which it actually already did, and then it drops them down to sort of get the profile for these particular fans. So you can see the nice RGB effects there. Another thing I forgot to point out here is on top, this piece comes out if you ever want to look at the top. Normally you would never really have to take that off, and I don't think it's really meant to come off, but if you need to take it off, you can. Alright, so our temperatures are holding right around 75 degrees Celsius, sort of bounces around a little between 73, 74, 75. And our overclock is at 4.9 gigahertz on the 9900K. We're using AIDA64 for the stress testing. The fan RPMs are maxed out at 1800, and our room temperature is about 20.5 Celsius. And that's about what I typically see for an air cooler this size. Alright, so we got the thermal camera out, and the color differences there just indicate not an absolute temperature, but a difference in temperature. So you can see a little bit of a warm spot right there on the fan motor for this exhaust side of the cooler. And then we'll swing around here and look at the fin stack. You can see where it's definitely a little warmer there. You can actually see a couple of the termination points there at the top from the heat pipes. And then looking at the intake side, again you can see the fan motor there. It's a little warmer, and then you can actually see through to the fin stack a little bit on the inside past the fan. Of course, the motherboard's a little warm here, and that's to be expected down there around the VRM is where you're going to see the maximum temperatures. And then looking at the other side of the cooler, it looks pretty much the same. You can see the fin stack there. Again, the color change just indicates that there's a difference between the temperatures. And then down there along the motherboard, of course, is where it gets a little bit warmer. And now I took the intake fan off so we can look directly at the fin stack. And the exhaust fan is still hooked up, but you can definitely see where the heat pipes are as they move up through the fin stack there. So I'll put the fan back on and wrap up the testing. Alright, so now what I've done is, let's see, I bypassed the little controller here, and what I did was I disconnected this connector. You can see this connects on the motherboard right there, but it was connected to this end right here. So now that I'm connected to the motherboard has control over the RGB effects. So this is called the Aura crate, or Armory crate I should say, for the Aura Sync. So when I make a change here, the motherboard and the cooler, they're strobing. So if I come up here to color cycle, now it will shift between the colors. And then if I go to static, of course it's just one color, and you can pick any color you want. And there's rainbow, so you can see how all that is synchronized. So you can control it from the motherboard or manually with the little controller here if you want. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you disconnect your little manual controller here and you plug it into the motherboard, well, you have to reboot your system because it won't recognize it until you do a reboot. Alright, so right now this cooler is on Amazon for $89. I think that's a decent price for a cooler like this with a 5-year warranty, 2 RGB fans, compatibility with your RAM, so you don't have to worry about not being able to use tall RAM modules there. I like the way this cooler looks. I like the all black stealthy appearance and the various socket coverages. Things to keep in mind, my test here is just for this particular system with this particular setup. Your mileage will vary depending upon the graphics card you use, how much heat it's dumping into the case, what case you use, how many fans, what kind of overclock you do, what your CPU is. There's so many variables. Big one is your room temperature, but all of those things come together and affect your CPU performance as far as cooling. So just keep that in mind. So with all that in mind, I would definitely give this cooler the Overclockers Club Gold Award. And next on the list here, I'll be looking at the MasterAir MA612, and I've got a couple of cool fans coming up to take a look at too, so stay tuned. So this is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.